What is FIOSys? FIOSys is a programmer's tool that takes over all of an application's interaction with its files. Relying on FIOSys to handle an application's file I/O provides two main benefits. A. Using FIOSys to manage an application's file I/O gives the developer advanced capabilities that would otherwise take years for the developer to create themselves from scratch. B. FIOSys encourages industry standardization by providing strong benefits for users to choose applications that incorporate FIOSys. Think of building a home from scratch, having to pound in 10,000 nails with a hammer, as well as lifting, cutting, and shaping 30,000 feet of wood for the framing and siding. That's a big, slow, expensive project. Now think of building the same house with prefabricated components made in a high-tech wood shop with heavy equipment, and using compressed air guns to drive nails in one every second. Any pro will tell you that it's all about the tools, and every year the tools get better, faster, and cheaper. That's what FIOSys is, a pre-made tool that can take months of development time off of smaller projects and years off of larger ones. And by incorporating the same tool in many different applications, those applications will be able to share data with each other in a way that promotes the flow of information between differing data sources, rather than the soup of mixed old and new technologies that now exists. The humble goal then for FIOSys is that one day every commercial, government, and research application, every college IT program, every smart device, every game, and every rocket sent to mine precious metals from an asteroid will incorporate FIOSys in the way it operates. What are the immediate developer benefits in using FIOSys to handle an application's file I/O? The years it has taken to develop FIOSys are years that other developers would have to invest themselves to come up with the same functionality that FIOSys provides. Especially with a complicated, file-intensive application like a spreadsheet, database, or text editor, the list goes on, there are years of development required to create the foundation for those applications' file manipulation. Here then are the services that FIOSys provides a developer on day one of its use. 1. Smart Insert and Delete. What is the slowest low-level process that a computer has to perform? Data moving between the processor, memory, and the various auxiliary cards travels at a fraction of the speed of light. Basically, electrons traveling through wires move nearly at the speed of light. It's only when transferring data to and from the disk drive that you descend into mechanical speeds. Essentially, the CPU zips along at light speed and then grinds to a halt as the disk spins up and the spindle arm moves out to the right place on the disk platter and data is transferred. Then the CPU has what it needs and goes back to work till the disk once again needs to be accessed and everything comes to a grinding halt. So the bottleneck for most computer applications involves disk I/O. And the slowest disk process that an application needs to perform is inserting or deleting data into the middle of a file. Consider a large file where you need to insert something small, maybe an individual database record, into the middle of this file. What has to happen is that, on average, half of the file has to be read into memory, then written back to disk a little to the right, so that there's now room to insert that new data record in the middle. The total work that needs to be performed then, on average, is the entire size of the file needs to be read or written for every single data insertion. What FIOSys does is perform smart insertion of data. Rather than moving parts of the file over constantly to make room for the insertion, the file is maintained in linked blocks, so that the first block consists of the original data before the insertion, the second block consists of the newly inserted data, and the third block consists of the original data that comes after the insertion. So your constant shifting of the entire file now consists of just the writing of the new data and some minor I/O to maintain the pointers to the sequential blocks of data. Deletion of data is handled similarly. Normally, you would need to read, on average, half of the file of data and then move this data to the left to overwrite the data that you now want to delete. FIOSys handles this by again maintaining linked blocks to handle the deletion. The first block consists of the original data that we want to preserve, and the second block is the last part of the block that we still want to preserve. The deleted data in the middle goes into a free space pool. So again, continually reading and writing the entire file, on average, is brought down to a small amount of I/O to handle the pointers between the blocks of data. This process is similar to how a file allocation table maintains data. As a file needs to grow, new blocks that are added to the file aren't necessarily in adjacent locations on the disk, as other files may reside there. The operating system will find free blocks and chain these blocks together to maintain the complete file. To the developer, the file is a contiguous flat file, but on disk, the file may be all over the place. 2. Tree-like organization. A second service that FIOSys provides is the ability to maintain a tree-like structure in your files. Let's say you wanted to create database functionality in one of your application's files. 1. The root of your file is the database. Under the root are various tables, say people, places, and events. Under each table, you may have a branch for your table definition, a branch for the data records in the table, and a branch for the various indexes in your table. Under the index branch, you might maintain multiple branches for each index path in your database. Each table would maintain a similar structure: definition, data, and indexes. Along with Smart I/O, reads, writes, insertions, and deletions, in any of these nodes, you can now maintain a complex data system in one single, comprehensible file structure. Data systems where all the elements of an application's data are maintained in one file are highly preferable to systems that require a suite of interrelated files. Microsoft Access is a great example of this. Everything in the database, including tables, forms, queries, reports, and charts, are all held in one file, which you can then email to someone, back up and archive, and share very easily, without having to create a complex directory of interconnected files that all have to stay in sync with each other. Can you imagine how hard it would be to create this kind of structure reliably in a flat file, with data records being added and deleted, tables built, redefined, and removed, and all the data coexisting seamlessly inside this file without conflicting with all the other data around it? 3. Incorruptibility. Data corruption is probably the biggest headache that a computer user has to be concerned about. Banking and financial transactions are of course critical enough, but corruption of a word processing document, spreadsheet, or even game data and player stats and accomplishments that have built up over months of work would be disastrous to lose if our data files weren't reliably saved. FIOSys performs a standard pre-imaging service to protect against this. What happens during typical pre-imaging is that the changes to a file are saved to a second file, a pre-image file, and safely committed to disk. Then these same changes are applied to the actual file you wanted to save. If something goes wrong while data is saved to the pre-image file, the application crashes or the computer goes down, your original file is still safe and untouched. If data is saved safely to the pre-image file, but something goes wrong when data is saved to the actual file, the pre-image file is safe and the data in it can be written again to the actual file once the system starts up again. The one problem with pre-imaging is that it essentially doubles the time it takes to save anything to disk. The pre-image file needs to be written to and committed to disk, and then the actual data file needs to be written to disk as well. FIOSys handles this more intelligently. New data to be written to disk is saved in a pre-image file, but then this data becomes the newest data available for I/O, and doesn't have to be written back to the original file. So disk I/O is held to a minimum, and the original data file is updated less frequently. Only when the application wants to fully commit this most recent data back to the original file, or when the file is closed, does all the pre-image data get written to the original file. Writing all updates at once, like this, is far more efficient than doing little updates sporadically to a file. Depending on the application, this will generally represent a much smaller overhead in disk I/O than standard pre-imaging. 4. Transaction processing. Let's say you go into your bank to make a loan payment from your checking account, but for some reason the system goes down after the payment is deducted from your checking account, but before your loan payment is made. So your checking account was debited, but your loan account wasn't credited. You end up with a late payment notice on your loan account, your credit rating goes down, and to add insult to injury, your checking account has insufficient funds to make a payment. Banks, of course, would prefer to avoid this kind of customer injury, so they cover this through transaction processing. This means that either both transactions go through or neither of them go through. A transaction isn't complete until everything is where it ought to be. FIOSys provides for this with full multi-user and multi-file transaction handling. Your application decides when to start the transaction and when to abort or finish it. Once every user and every file has all the data updated that needs to occur at once, this data is pre-imaged and committed to the various files that they belong to. This kind of processing isn't limited to just financial transactions. Even in a complex database report, a game, or scientific analysis, there are times that you want to make sure a complete set of changes hits files at once before those files are committed to disk. 5. Multi-user functionality. Advanced systems, usually databases but sometimes other applications, need the ability to have multiple users accessing the same file without stepping on each other's data. Think of an airline seat assignment application that has to allow multiple customers to choose seats without two people buying the same seat at the same time. FIOSys provides multi-user and multi-file data locking capabilities, complete with collision handling and timeouts. In addition, FIOSys provides a complete rights system so that different users have differing access rights to a company's files. One user can have full read, write, and build rights on a file, whereas another user may only have read rights on that same file. Rights access control operates on a tree level in the file so that a user can have full rights on a database branch, but another user may have just read rights or no rights on that same database branch. 6. Cross-platform compatibility. The goal for FIOSys is to be able to operate on every platform: Windows, Unix, and any other operating system. It will even accommodate differing hardware structures, and a FIOSys file will be transferable between a Little Endian and Big Endian system without application intervention. We are deeply committed to making FIOSys system independent so that no one system can claim it as their own. This is essential for our goal of industry-wide acceptance and standardization. 7. Self-testing. As developers, the last thing any of us want to do at this stage in our lives is have one more panicked, the customer has a bug session that takes until 4 in the morning to fix. Towards this end, we have built extensive self-testing into the FIOSys system. So far, about 1/3 of FIOSys' development time has been in its self-testing capacity. The goal is to spend at least 1/4 of the system's ongoing development time enhancing this self-testing capability. Because of this, every system installed will be at least as stable, and actually more so than the last system installed. 8. Specialization. Or, why don't you do what you do best and let us do what we do best? Think of it this way. When you're attempting to create the next generation spreadsheet, database system, or report generator, you're on a deadline, and it's the big fancy new features you want to spend your time and budget on. The last thing you're going to spend adequate development resources on is the basic low-level file I/O system. How to organize a file and get data into and out of it reliably is of course important, but low on the priority list. It's the big new fancy features that are going to sell your system. But with FIOSys, the low-level file system is all we do. We don't have to concern ourselves with the great display, interactive interface, and graphing feature set that you're planning on. All we do is file manipulation, so we give it all the attention that it deserves, far more than you could afford to spend your time on. Do you want to create an elaborate tree-based, high-speed, insert-delete, transactional, multi-user, control-based system and build into it a rigorous self-testing capability? Not likely. So why not let someone else dedicated to doing this the right way do it? Standardization. So that's half of what FIOSys provides a developer, a large feature set of file manipulation tools. What else is there? Actually, the larger goal of FIOSys is to promote standardization in the computer industry, so that those applications that use FIOSys will be more competitive and accepted industry-wide. Here's how. Consider our database example earlier regarding tree-like file structuring. This database node could represent a standardized root, which can be inserted anywhere in an even larger file structure. This node then would represent a discoverable, fully integrated, and self-sufficient database mechanism that is now part of a larger organizational system, maybe including report generators, reminders, and corporate action processes. keeping this in mind, let's say you wanted to create the next great enterprise reporting system complete with these capabilities. 1. A database system, including the ability to store advanced data elements such as viewable and editable images and PDF documents. 2. Spreadsheet functionality, including worksheets and calculated fields. 3. A report engine. 4. Graphs and chart generation. Of course, to create all of this in a modern way that competes with existing systems that are already out there is daunting. But in addition to the developer's investment in time and money, what customer wants to invest their time and money in setting up and learning your great but complicated new enterprise system? But what if there were other FIOSys-aware tools and applications available that 1. Can edit and view image files and PDF documents, 2. Provide spreadsheet and worksheet capabilities, 3. Generate reports from existing data, and 4. Handle graphs and charts? A FIOSys-aware tool can look through a standardized FIOSys file and find the parts of that file that it understands. A FIOSys-aware image editor and viewer could ignore the overall database setup, graphs, charts, and reports, but find image nodes that it can view and edit. A FIOSys-aware reporting tool might ignore the images and PDF documents, but query the existing data that it does understand and generate reports based on that data. And if the application is flexible enough, any FIOSys-aware component could plug into it and provide these capabilities, maybe even one the customer already owns. The benefit to the developer is that instead of having to author all of these separate capabilities, the developer can bundle together tools that do the basic work needed and focus on the newer aspects of their enterprise application that will make it competitive. The benefit to the user is that instead of having to learn some new image editor and report generator that you, the developer, had to rush to create, they can use the FIOSys-aware tools that they already know and love to interact with your application. So the developer needs to do much less work to get their product to market, and the user gets to use the advanced and dedicated tools that they have already bought and are familiar with. Win-win. Of course, it's going to take some time for FIOSys to become the new industry standard, but if many developers find the basic services that FIOSys provides useful, then more and more applications will become FIOSys aware and can interoperate with other applications that use FIOSys. For the current status of FIOSys and what is needed to bring it to market, please go to fiosys.net to learn more.